All right, we're back to our last third talk here, and our main attraction. I can't shout loud enough anymore to get everybody in order here, but thank you for sticking around for us to have this conversation with Ed Freeze. It's been a long time since we've done one of these, and I'm always glad to catch Ed's wisdom and the sort of sense of momentous history that he's always participated in. So thanks for doing this, Ed.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Dean. You've been around from as long as I've been there. You know, you were the first like real reporter I ever met. Not like a games reporter, but like a real reporter. It's like somebody who would ask hard questions. So I always appreciated that.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to go through like some quick history of your career for us and help people understand like how long you've been around and what kind of things you've done?
You just want me to talk about my? All right, sure. I'm a local kid. I grew up here over in Bellevue, and I grew up in a house of two engineers. My dad was an electrical engineer, and my mom was a chemical engineer. And they both moved out here to work for Boeing. And so I just grew up in a house full of technical stuff, and I thought it was normal. And, when I was going into high school, the first personal computers were coming out, so I was kind of born at the right time for a curious kid who loved science fiction and, loved pinball machines and, I don't know, anything that was like, could entertain me as a kid. And so, my parents bought me an Atari 800, and I fell in love with the machine and fell in love with programming. And actually, that's how I got in the game business. I wrote a Frogger clone that somebody saw. I was working at Shakey's Pizza to make money to buy games, and writing 6502 assembly on the side at home. And somebody tracked me down. It just said, "Buy Eddie Freeze." They found the right Eddie Freeze and found me here. Anyway. Long story short, I ended up, going off to school, get a computer science degree. Game industry melted down halfway through when I was in college. The company I worked for went away. I think it's really funny when people talk. They're like, "Oh, this is the period we're going through now. It's like the crash of '84," and I'm like, "No, it's nothing." In the crash of '83, '84, just to give you a sense, the game business went from I'll just use a unit. I'll say 8 units of revenue to 1 unit of revenue. Okay. I'll show you a chart later of what we're going through right now. It's nowhere near that, nowhere near. But anyway, so yeah, that's how I got started. Game industry crashed, and I had to get a real job. I went to Microsoft. So.
Yeah, and you were doing spreadsheets at Microsoft and things like that, and doing very well. But you wanted to do games, and like, how did you make that transition into games at Microsoft? And then also, like, how important were things like Microsoft Flight Simulator at the time as well?
Yeah, so we just moved forward 10 years in my career. So I spent 5 years working on Excel as first the youngest programmer on the first version of Excel for Windows, growing up to be the lead programmer on the team, and then moving over to run Word development for 5 years. And all that time, I was playing games. I was I was programming at work, going home and playing games. And that time, from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, was just an incredible time of innovation in the game business. Most of the genres that we know today were created at that time. And just the giants of, Sid Meier and Peter Molyneux and all that was their time. And so I kind of got to the point in my career where I couldn't program anymore. It was like the next step up for me was to run a business for the company. And when I was running Word development, I was still programming half time, and I loved to program. But if I took that next step, I had to give up programming. And I thought, well, what else do I love? The thing I really love is games. So what if I could go do the games business? I could, switch from kind of one of the things I love to the other thing I love, but as my career. And I was lucky enough that there was a job opening to take over the games group, and so I came over in early 1996 to run the team.
And I guess there was this little game called Age of Empires that I guess.
Yeah, you
sort of came
mentioned
out of nowhere.
Age and Flight Sim. Yeah, so I can go on with that if that's enough of a hint from you. Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I learned is that every great publisher is really built on having some foundation of games that are just super successful, right? That they can create sequels from. And when I arrived at the games group, I mean, that game was Flight Simulator. We had just acquired the team, and one of the first things I did was help move them out from Chicago to Redmond to work on the latest version of Flight Simulator. And that was really the engine that generated profit for all the growth that we did over the next, from there till Xbox. And one of the things they showed me when I interviewed was this little game from a little company called Ensemble Studios in Dallas, Texas. And it was a real-time strategy game. And I had been a big Command & Conquer, Red Alert player, loved RTS. And so it was one of the things that made me want to take the job. I was excited, to have a chance to work on one. That game, a year later we launched it, and it was incredibly successful. We had a fantastic team working on it. Some of the people who are here today were involved with that, and some of the other games I'll talk about. It became sort of the second engine for growth for us. It became the second profit generator for the business. And then we just started using that to kind of reinvest to acquire studios and to try to just grow our portfolio on the PC.
So then I guess the opportunities just started sort of multiplying there, and I guess four of the dudes at Microsoft came to you with this suggestion that they do an Xbox, right? And it's interesting how that, like, all of the focus of that was really all about hardware and thinking of, like, how we can get the PC to be more like a console and things like that. But you seem to bring a different kind of maturity to that conversation, I think, and this suggestion that software on top of that hardware was actually maybe the more important thing. But anyway, what was your sort of role there? What were some things that are memorable that still stick with you, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the core idea came out of some great guys in the DirectX team. And, the original name, obviously, it comes from the DirectX box. That's what it was originally called, shortened to Xbox. Marketing team hated it. They tried to come up with better names over and over, and they could never make one that would test higher than Xbox. And so finally they had to throw up their hands and go with it. But, the guys, we're talking about people like Seamus, Blakely, and guys like that. They were evangelists for DirectX. Their job was to go around and get people to use DirectX, because Microsoft wanted games to stop running on DOS and start running on Windows. And so they didn't really have teams to do what it would take to do a console. Like, they needed a first-party team. That's why they came to me, right? I had a first-party game development team of hundreds of people. So, as far as us, now we're getting in closer to the late 90s, we had grown quite a bit. Our market share was probably between 15 and 20% of, total PC game sales. And we were really bumping into the Activisions and EAs of the world, and it was getting harder and harder to add another percentage or two of growth. But there was this whole huge console game market that was untouched, for us. And so when these guys came in to talk to me, what they first presented was, hey, this would be a machine that really was a Windows machine, that it was a PC running Windows, but it was disguised to look like a game console. That was the original pitch for Xbox. And I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect for me because I have all these PC games and we can just put them on this and it'll work. We won't have to deal with Sony or Nintendo or whatever. But of course that evolved over time.
Just coincidentally, I guess this year Microsoft is launching this ROG, Xbox Ally and the Xbox Ally X. And one of the things that they say when they're presenting it is that, we're trying to get this machine to really work fast and to, just be instantaneous and otherwise, do only one thing, really run games well. And so we're taking out a bunch of windows. And so
which is exactly what we had to do with the original
large
Xbox.
Chunks of windows are disappearing, and the operating system that's left here is really just for running games. And it reminded me of what you guys had to do way back in the day of thinning down the PC.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. As soon as we went out and started to talk to people, other game developers around the world, they didn't want us to use half the memory for Windows. They didn't want, memory was tight back then, They didn't want us to use a bunch of the processor. And so, more and more as the hardware evolved, it started to look more and more like the other game consoles that were out at the time. With the biggest exception probably being that, it had an x86 processor, which a lot of PC developers knew, but also it had a hard disk, and that was, something different.
Yeah. So you guys came up with Halo. So,
yeah, there was a Valentine's Day Massacre meeting where Bill got really mad and yelled at us for many hours about when he realized this wasn't going to run Windows anymore. But approved the project anyway. I'm just going to turn a long story into a very short story. And after that, we had less than 18 months to pull together a first-party lineup for this console once it was approved. And so we were looking everywhere. We had a big checkbook. That was the good thing. we got approved a lot of money to spend. We worked with Lorne Lanning, kind of stole him away from Sony with the Oddworld franchise to make a game for us, and that was an early kind of coup for us. But yeah, one day I knew the head of BizDev for a little company in Chicago called Bungie. I had played one of their games and was really impressed before I took the job. And and they called me one day and said, hey, our company's really struggling. It looks like we're probably going to have to sell to Take-Two, but we just wanted to call you and see if there were other options. And I was like, yeah, there's other options. I'd love to talk to you. And that was the start of a conversation. And many people on my team worked on it. And we negotiated with Ryan Brandt, who created Take-Two. And we're ultimately able to cut a kind of a complicated deal where we left because Take-Two was already owned a third of the company. So we left all the old Bungie titles. That intellectual property would go to Take-Two. We would complete a game called Oni and give that to Take-Two to ship. All we wanted was all the development team and this new thing they were working on called Halo, which turned out to be a smart bet.
Yeah. So, you fought a console war here, and it was very interesting. I always thought that one of the hardest things about that, though, was this one number sticks out to me that, like, Microsoft had 1,000 game developers at one point, but Sony had 2,500, right? And so, like, the math was set up so that you guys were going to lose, right? And I don't know how, like, what was the tug of war like when, you're going in asking, like, I need more developers, or I need more game companies or studios, and yet somehow the division or the company had to stay in a profitable state, I guess, right?
So, coming out of Valentine's Day Massacre, we basically said, we want to keep the rest of the company away. We want you to keep the rest of the company away, Bill and Steve. We want, X billion dollars. And we want to go off on our own and make this thing. Because the timeline is too tight to deal with a lot of company politics. And they gave us that. And honestly, we couldn't have spent more money in the time that we had. I mean, I couldn't anyway. We had the resources we need to put that launch lineup together. The biggest thing that was short for us was time. I mean, we had to like find a racing game that was already pretty well done on Dreamcast and pull it over to make this game called Project Gotham Racing. So coming into launch, I think it wasn't an issue. And it was I think back on it as a super fun time. And you talk about, well, Sony had more people than us. That was kind of my career. Like, when I came to Microsoft, we had a group of 7 people fighting Lotus with their core product, Lotus 1, 2, 3. Lotus was bigger than all of Microsoft at that time. Then I went to work on Word. Again, Word Perfect was, huge. It was a really tough competitor. And then it went over to games where we were an underdog again. So I love being in an underdog position at Microsoft. I got to do it the whole time I was there. And, to me, that just adds to the fun of, the challenge of trying to beat people who are bigger than you.
Now, I remember like some of the sort of hardest time you had, though, also was after the success of the Xbox, and then as Xbox 360 was coming together, and the pressure that was on about Halo 2, right? And how soon were you going to get this out? And like Steve Ballmer, Jay Allard, they said, you got to get this out like right away. Like, it's the biggest hit. Let's come out with it a year later, or let's come out with it as we launch the Xbox 360. It's got to be ready, right? And yet, in some ways, you're resisting a lot of this, and like there's this tug going on. And I wonder, what were you thinking, and how does this relate to pressures that developers face, like every day?
Yeah, I would kind of relate it a little bit to the time we're in now, actually. When, Rob was talking earlier about, how we see these cycles. It felt like, now we're talking about around 2004, and it felt like one of those times when this idea, you were starting to hear this phrase that basically, people wanted to make a smaller number of higher quality titles. That was one way they would say it. Or, from like, you get somebody in accounting and they're like, hey, I realized that like, you're working on like 100 games, but all the profit comes from 3. Why don't we just make the 3? And so you get kind of that kind of thinking happening. And I feel some echoes of that in the market right now, and it's like, no, you don't understand. It's really hard to find these hits in our business, really hard. And when you have one, your next job is really to nurture it and grow it and continue to innovate with it so that it can be an evergreen title for you and continue to generate the profit you're going to use to make the next hits. And so you have to take the money you're making here and you have to put it back to work, making sometimes dozens or even more titles, trying to find that next really big hit that's going to be important. And so I wasn't always successful at explaining this to my bosses. And sometimes it got frustrating. It was like the particular meeting you're talking about, we realized that Halo was going to be a year late. Halo 2 was going to be a year late. And they tried to put a lot of pressure on me to keep it on the original schedule. And I was basically like, no, this is a horrible decision, and it's going to be a mistake. Anyway, that led to me threatening to quit. And then probably within 6 months of that, I actually did quit because I got my way with Halo 2, but there were more of those fights going on, and I could see where things were going. And so I decided, it's time to move on in my life. I'd been at the company almost 20 years. I had one son who's named Xander, who's now 23. So That was 23 years ago. And it was just being born. Xander's named after the Xbox, and my second son, Jasper, was on the way at that point. Anyway, so yeah, that was kind of a big turning point in my life.
So you had this great career there at Microsoft. You had 18 million copy hits, right? And I think at your going away lunch, you said something like, this was like the end of your first life, I guess, or you now have a chance to have a second life, right, as you're leaving Microsoft, right?
That's true. We're getting into book 2 now, I think.
Now, yeah. So
anyway, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we should, fast forward a little because I want to get to more of like what's happening right now. But yeah, I left and got to work on a whole ton of stuff. I mean, and one of the things, I was a big EverQuest player back at that time, and I was super excited that summer that I quit. I was actually on the EverQuest 2 beta team. I knew the EverQuest team really well because we almost published the original EverQuest. Actually, we were going to do it, and then Sony found out and stopped us and published it themselves. But I was playing EverQuest 2 and I was playing World of Warcraft beta, and I sent mail to John Smedley like, "You're in trouble, buddy, because this new game is really, really good." But anyway, did that. I started a company. I loved World of Warcraft. I actually played with a guild that was mostly Microsoft testers called Liquid Courage, and we had many happy hours together. I loved it so much, I started a little 3D printing company called Fingerprints, and we made 3D color prints of people's characters, But I mostly was doing advising and board stuff. I helped some people start game companies and run game companies. Did some consulting work for some big companies. Also, yeah, started getting involved sort of with it. The advising thing sort of led to boards, and I learned more about boards and how private companies fund themselves, and that ultimately led to me 6 years ago starting a venture fund. Really, it wouldn't have happened without Crafton. There's some Crafton people here, and they really approached me and were willing to put in the first funding for what became One Up Ventures. Immediately teamed up with Kelly Wallach, who's really well known in the indie space, created the Indie Mega Booth. And over the last 6 years, we've invested in 80 small game companies around the world. And it's been super fun. To me, it feels a lot like my old job. I'm looking at pitch decks, and I'm trying to decide who we should bet on, and I'm trying to give money to people I believe in, and that's really one of the funnest things you can do in this business.
And has it all gone like how you wanted it to go, or the industry's gone through a lot of ups and downs, gone through the pandemic? It's been a tough time to be an investor in general, right? Has it gone the way you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things I wanted to do. One was I thought it was really important to have a very broad portfolio, okay? Because that's what I was used to at Microsoft. You'd have, maybe 100 titles in development or more, because you're trying to find the couple hits. That's really what the game is all about. And it's actually kind of hard in venture to set up to do that. Lead investors, the people who lead the rounds, they have to typically they have to have a bigger team. They can do less investments because they're more involved with each individual company. They do all the legal work, but they also tend to have one of the partners sit on the board of every company. And so they have to have a bigger team and get less broad. If we could sort of ride along with the lead investors, is my thinking, like be followers on seed rounds, we could come in early and create a really broad portfolio. And so that was the investment strategy, and I think it's the right one. If you can get away with it, it really means you have to work closely with the lead investors, you have to be a good partner, and you have to bring value that's more than just money. So let's talk about that second part of what OneUp is all about. The value that we bring is, and this is based on a group that a friend of mine, David Ettery, started many years ago. And he created this group of indie developers. And he connected 50 indie developers together and started kind of making them talk together and making them help each other. And with his blessing, I borrowed that model and applied it to OneUp. And so we created this OneUp community. And so the whole idea is if you take our $500,000 investment, you become part of this community. And the community comes with a whole bunch of benefits. I don't take a salary, so a big part of the management fees that the fund generates goes directly into the community, and it lets us buy industry data for everyone. It lets us do events at big conferences around the world. It lets us do a big annual retreat where we fly the heads of all the companies out. That's actually, I fly out next Friday to, we'll be just outside London, and spend a week together with all these people, sharing in person and helping each other to be successful. And so it's a really supportive community that we've created. Ideas from the group that I had been part of, but also a lot of ideas that Kelly brought in from the work that she did in Indie Mega Booth. And so I would say talk to anybody who's taken investment from OneUp. I think they're going to say really good things about what they've taken from the community and how meaningful it's been to them. And I've loved being part of building that. Yeah.
I like how you sort of came to the conclusion that community is what matters, right? And I don't know, that's the kind of same conclusion that I've come to after all these decades of work as well, and that this GamesBeat community is what means a whole lot to me. I wonder if there's other good lessons though that you can give everybody here, just from all that experience, investing in 80 companies. Like, what have you learned?
Yeah, I do have one thing I want to talk about. Well, first, you told your story of pain and suffering, so I was going to tell mine, which is that the funny thing is I go rock climbing with my boys once or twice a week. And so, I'm 61 now. I'm one of the older people in the gym, but I'm pretty good at not getting hurt, and I'm falling, I'm trying hard. Sometimes I get little strains or whatever, but I'm okay. But I was moving a subwoofer in a bag, which was not smart, and 2 days ago, and it ripped out the bottom of the bag and fell right on my big toe, like boom, right on that toe. And yeah, I thought I broke my toe first, but now it just has a really nasty bruise, and so I've been limping around the last few days. But anyway, so I don't know why I'm sharing that, but so I had an interesting meeting earlier this week. An old friend of mine he runs a small indie publisher. We get together for coffee when he was in town, and we met up, and he told me about the success they're having with some of their indie titles and how well it's going. And he gets most of his funding from China. And one of the things he said to me was, he said that Chinese developers are 40% more efficient than American developers. And he said, and they're 3 times cheaper. Yeah, so, and I'm sure that's true. He said they work from 10 to 10, 7 days a week or something, and they're 3 times cheaper. And so my response to him was, well, my game of the year this year, by far, is a game called Expedition 33. And if you have not played this game, you really need to play it. It's an incredible, beautiful, artistic game made by a small team in France. And I'm like, do you know what working in France is like? I mean, you're gonna get in trouble if you work more than 35 hours, These guys drink wine at lunch. I don't know if you've ever gone out with a French developer. I'm like, how do you go back and program after that? And, so it made me realize that our industry is about more than just the things you heard about today. It has to be about more than spreadsheets and sales and blah, blah, blah. You know, it has to ultimately at its core be about creating art. This game is a work of art. I mean, it's a game, without too many spoilers, about people struggling with the loss of a child in a tragic event. If I came to you and pitched you, I want to make a game about the pain that parents and siblings have, you know, I'd be like, really? You got to remember that the game business is like the end of a long path of human beings trying to understand the world. You know, it goes back to as long as we've had writing, before writing, you know, poetry, you know, plays, books, right? Movies, and now games, right? And we have to be telling stories about the human condition. We're the tip of the spear, the arrow, I don't know, of that job now. You know, what we're making is art about the human condition. It has to be. And like, I didn't hear, I was waiting through both panels. I didn't hear the word art once, you know. And I think people were talking about, well, what about America versus Japan or China? Like, you know, we can look at the growth of the game business and we can say, yeah, we've grown a bunch, and we've grown a lot because we've opened new territories around the world. But we're also opening new competitors around the world, right? And we can see that, you know, and it's very clear. They go through, first they do codev, and then they learn how to do it, and then they make their own original stuff. And that's okay, but we can't forget that at its heart, we need to be telling stories. And if you look at somebody like Hollywood, they have that figured out, you know? They, think about all the jobs in Hollywood that call themselves an artist, you know? Like the writers are artists, you know, the cinematographers are artists, the directors are artists, you know, the actors all call themselves artists. Do we think about our business that way? And you know, Hollywood has been able to like, kind of, I hate to use the M word, but monopolize, you know, worldwide entertainment for a long period of time. We should learn from that. We need to be taking ourselves more seriously. We need to make things that are more ambitious. We can't survive just making copies and sequels. We have to have higher artistic goals to win against our competitors around the world, and ultimately to do what's really been handed to us, which is, you know, this legacy of storytelling. So that's what I would say.
Very good.
That's all I got for you guys.
So I think that's a good spot to end. Does anybody have like a burning question maybe to ask? Let's see. I guess you.
Okay, this is a two-part, and it only came up because as I was listening to you, the second question popped up in my head. So you've had a lot of different hats that you've worn. You've been an executive, you've been a programmer, you've built your own Atari version of Halo. You've done a lot, an investor. Out of all these hats that you've worn and all these roles that you've had, which do you consider to have given you probably the best lesson, or maybe the most like unexpected lesson in making games? And keeping that in mind, if you were to maybe start over all over again today, this year, without your Microsoft background, without your track record, and how would you go about tackling getting into the gaming industry, and what advice would you give yourself? That's a
Wow.
question.
Okay. So for the first part, what I learned along the way from going from an individual contributor to a vice president running a division was that when you're an individual contributor, it's really important that you're good at one thing, like really good at one thing. And when as you work your way up, it becomes more and more important that you don't suck at any one thing, because you have to be able to do everything. You know, you have to be able to give a talk. You have to be able to get an employee excited who's not excited right now, who's doing really good and you want to keep. You have to be able to fire an employee who's doing bad and be able to move on with your job. You know, it just kind of goes on and on and on and on, the different things that an executive has to do. So when I see them fail, it's usually because they have, and like everybody, nobody's perfect. They have some weakness, and ultimately it's the weakness of some area that takes them down or doesn't let them go on to the next step. So that's a way to think about it. You know, to move up, you kind of have to be more well-rounded, and you have to kind of start to understand what other people do and other teams. And maybe I can't draw worth a damn, but I can talk to an artist, I think, and I can talk to them in a way that we can communicate. Not just talk to programmers. So I would think about that. I would think about becoming more well-rounded as you move up. For me, I kind of think of myself as fundamentally lazy in a way. And so I always have to be like excited about what I'm working on. So I'm constantly looking for something where I can kind of trick myself into not thinking I'm working. And you know, and like climbing is an example of that. I love going to the gym and like solving these vertical problems, and at the end I'm really tired, but I didn't feel like I just sat there and lifted weights, you know. I had fun with my kids, and we were trying to solve these problems, and we were laughing and falling and failing and succeeding, and it was just a joyous experience. And so I want to like look for that in the things that I do, you know. And so I guess that comes to the third part of your question, which is like, what advice would I give other people? It's like, look for those kinds of things. You know, what is it that motivates you? What is it that gets you excited? What is it that would make you work? You know, like a really common interview question we have in the game business is, what do you do on the side? Like, what did you do that wasn't a school project? You know, did you you learned this stuff? Did you make your own game, or did you just, you know what I mean? And so I would look for that. You know, I think people need to find. I mean, it's a corny thing, right? Find your passion, but it's really true for me. I mean, I found just a few things that I really love to do at first. You know, I love to program. I love video games, and I was able to build a whole career on that. So.
I think we're going to have to break up into small groups here. But
yeah, I'll be around. Happy to talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your attention.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.